Imagine standing before the most advanced alien fleet in the galaxy, watching sleek vessels that could glass entire planets with a single thought. Picture alien commanders expecting awe, expecting submission, expecting humanity to kneel before their technological supremacy. But what happens when those same aliens discover that humans don't just build ships, we forge legends from steel and determination? What occurs when they realize that our primitive vessels carry something their advanced computers could never calculate, the unbreakable spirit of a species that has turned every disadvantage into victory? This is the story of the day the Zeltharian Empire learned why humans have a saying, "It's not the size of the ship, it's the fight in the crew." They came to demonstrate their power. They left questioning everything they thought they knew about warfare, honor, and the terrifying ingenuity of the species they had so gravely underestimated. Welcome to humanity's finest hour among the stars. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Martian shipyards when Admiral Sarah Chen received the transmission that would change everything. The holographic display flickered to life in her office, revealing the stern face of Fleet Admiral Harrison from Earth Command. "Sarah, we've got company coming. Big company." Harrison's weathered features bore the weight of 3 decades in space, but she had never seen him look this grim. "The Zeltharian Empire wants to have a little chat." Chen set down her coffee, the bitter Martian blend suddenly tasting like ash. The Zeltharians were the stuff of legends in human space, whispered about in the outer colonies like some mythical force. Their empire stretched across 40 star systems, built on the bones of 17 conquered species. Most civilizations didn't get a chat with the Zeltharians. They got subjugation or extinction. "What kind of chat?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "The kind where they show up with their entire 7th Fleet and politely suggest we consider the benefits of joining their empire." Their exact words were that they want to demonstrate the power of the Zeltharian military so that humanity can make an informed decision about our future. Chen walked to the massive reinforced window overlooking the shipyards. Below her, dozens of human vessels were in various stages of construction and repair. Sleek frigates, bulky cargo haulers, and, the pride of the human fleet, 3 massive dreadnoughts that represented humanity's most advanced military technology. To anyone familiar with galactic standards, they looked primitive. Angular where alien ships were curved, brutal where others were elegant, and covered in armor plating that most species had abandoned centuries ago in favor of energy shields. "How long do we have?" Chen asked. 72 hours. They'll be arriving at the edge of the Sol system, requesting permission to enter with their demonstration fleet. Demonstration fleet? Harrison's expression darkened further. 12 ships, including their flagship. According to our intelligence, each of their cruisers could probably take on our entire home fleet. Their flagship could glass Mars from orbit without breaking a sweat. Chen nodded slowly, her mind already working through possibilities. "I assume we're not actually considering surrender?" "Hell no. But Earth Command wants to play this smart. We'll meet them with full honors, let them show off their pretty ships, and maybe learn something about their technology while we're at it. You're being assigned as our primary naval representative. Show them the fleet, let them feel superior, and try not to start an interstellar war." After the transmission ended, Chen stood alone in her office, watching the organized chaos of the shipyards. The workers below looked like ants from this height, but she knew each of them by name. The human fleet wasn't impressive by galactic standards, but it was theirs. Every rivet, every piece of hull plating, every jury-rigged system represented human sweat and human determination. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. The entire Sol defense fleet was repositioned to provide what Earth Command diplomatically called an honor escort for their visitors. In reality, every human ship in the system would be watching, ready for the first sign of hostility. When the Zeltharians arrived, they did so with a display that took Chen's breath away. Their ships didn't drop out of hyperspace so much as they materialized, reality bending around them like water. The vessels themselves were works of art, flowing lines of silver and blue that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Each ship was easily twice the size of humanity's largest dreadnought, and their flagship was so massive it had its own gravitational field. Chen watched from the bridge of the UES Defiant, humanity's newest dreadnought, and her own command. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, but she could feel the tension in the air. They were looking at ships that could reduce Earth to rubble without effort, crewed by beings who had conquered half the galaxy. Incoming transmission from the Zeltharian flagship, reported Lieutenant Rodriguez from Communications. On screen. The view screen shimmered, revealing the interior of what could only be described as a palace. Crystal formations grew from the walls, pulsing with soft light, while impossible geometries made the space seem larger than the entire human ship. In the center stood a Zeltharian, tall and elegant with features that seemed carved from living marble. "Greetings, representatives of humanity," the alien said, its voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I am Fleet Admiral Korath Vostal of the 7th Imperial Fleet. We come to demonstrate the power and glory of the Zeltharian Empire, so that your species might understand what awaits those who join us willingly." Chen straightened in her command chair. "Welcome to the Sol System, Admiral Vostal. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Space Force. We're honored by your visit and look forward to learning about your impressive ships." Vostal's expression suggested the faintest hint of amusement. "Indeed. Perhaps you would join me aboard my flagship for a more detailed discussion? I confess curiosity about your own vessels. They are quite unique in their design philosophy." The way he said unique made it clear he meant primitive, but Chen kept her expression neutral. "I would be delighted to tour your ship, Admiral. Perhaps afterward, you might be interested in seeing some of our vessels as well?" "Of course. I'm sure they will prove most educational." An hour later, Chen found herself walking through corridors that defied everything she knew about ship design. The Zeltharian flagship was massive beyond belief, with internal spaces that seemed to bend physics itself. Gardens grew in zero gravity, waterfalls flowed upward, and the very walls hummed with power that her engineering brain couldn't begin to comprehend. Admiral Vostal proved to be a gracious host, explaining various systems with the casual pride of someone showing off a particularly impressive collection. The ship's main weapon could destroy a planet. Its shields could withstand the explosion of a star. Its engines could cross the galaxy in months rather than the centuries human technology required. "Impressive," Chen said, and meant it. The technology on display was centuries beyond anything humanity could produce. "Your engineers must be exceptionally skilled. The Zeltharian Empire has had 50,000 years to perfect our methods," Vostal replied. "We have learned much from the species we have welcomed into our fold. Each brings their own unique contributions to our collective knowledge." They paused before a massive viewing port that looked out onto the human fleet. From here, the human ships looked even more primitive than usual. Angular, bulky, and covered in what appeared to be random patches of armor and external equipment. Chen felt a familiar surge of pride looking at them. "Your vessels are certainly distinctive," Vostal observed. "Such heavy armor plating is quite unusual. Most species abandon physical armor in favor of energy shielding once they develop sufficient power generation." "We've found armor has its advantages," Chen replied carefully. "Reliability, mainly. Energy shields can fail, but steel doesn't. An interesting philosophy. Perhaps somewhat limited by your current technological capabilities?" Chen smiled. "Perhaps. Though we've found that sometimes the old ways have their own merits." As the tour continued, Chen began to understand what she was really seeing. The Zeltharian ships were marvels of engineering, there was no doubt about that. But they were also standardized, perfected, and utterly predictable. Every system had been refined over millennia to achieve maximum efficiency. There was no waste, no redundancy, and no room for improvisation. It was the fleet of a species that had been so successful for so long that they had forgotten how to adapt. The tour concluded with a visit to the flagship's main bridge, a space that looked more like a cathedral than a command center. Holographic displays showed the positions of every ship in both fleets, and Chen could see her own vessels marked with symbols that clearly indicated their estimated combat value. According to the Zeltharian computers, the entire human fleet combined wouldn't last 5 minutes against a single Zeltharian cruiser. "I trust you have found this educational, Admiral Chen," Vostal said as they prepared to return her to her ship. "Tomorrow, we will conduct a more formal demonstration of our capabilities. Perhaps a simulated engagement to illustrate the difference in our respective technologies?" Chen felt her pulse quicken, but kept her voice level. "What kind of simulation did you have in mind?" "Nothing too elaborate. A simple tactical exercise. One of our cruisers against your finest vessel, using non-lethal weapons of course. Think of it as a friendly competition." The predatory gleam in his eyes suggested it would be anything but friendly. This was the real purpose of their visit, not just to demonstrate Zeltharian superiority, but to humiliate humanity so thoroughly that resistance would be unthinkable. That sounds fascinating, Chen replied. I'm sure our crews would learn a great deal from such an exercise. As her shuttle carried her back to the Defiant, Chen stared out at the alien ships surrounding them. Beautiful, deadly, and absolutely convinced of their own invincibility. She thought about the conversation she was about to have with her crew, about the impossible odds they were facing, and about the fact that Earth Command had authorized this demonstration for a very specific reason. The Zeltharians expected humanity to be impressed by their superiority. They expected fear, awe, and eventual submission. What they didn't expect was that sometimes the species they encountered had their own ideas about how these demonstrations should go. Chen activated her personal communicator as the shuttle docked. Lieutenant Rodriguez, please signal Earth Command. Tell them the demonstration is confirmed for tomorrow. And send a priority message to Captain Morrison on the Intrepid. Tell him it's time to show our guests what human engineering really looks like. Through the shuttle's viewport, she could see the sleek lines of the Zeltharian fleet, their perfect formation speaking to millennia of military precision. Soon, they would learn why humans had survived everything the galaxy had thrown at them. They would discover what happened when a species built for war encountered beings who had turned survival itself into an art form. Tomorrow, the Zeltharians would get their demonstration. It just wouldn't be the one they were expecting. The morning of the demonstration dawned clear over Mars, the red planet's thin atmosphere offering no obstacle to the view of the two fleets facing each other across the void. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching as her crew made final preparations for what would either be the most important day in human military history or their last. Final systems check complete, Admiral, reported Commander Martinez, her first officer. All departments report ready for the demonstration. Chen nodded, her eyes fixed on the Zeltharian formation hanging like deadly jewelry against the starfield. Signal the Intrepid. Tell Captain Morrison he's cleared for the demonstration profile. Across the tactical display, she could see the human ship breaking from formation, moving toward the designated combat zone. The UES Intrepid wasn't the largest ship in the human fleet, or the newest, but she was special in ways that wouldn't be apparent to alien observers. Chen had specifically chosen her for this demonstration, and Captain Morrison was exactly the right man for what was about to happen. A communication channel opened, revealing Admiral Vosthal's elegant features once again. Behind him, the bridge of the Zeltharian flagship bustled with activity as they prepared to record humanity's inevitable defeat for posterity. Admiral Chen, we are ready to begin the demonstration. Our cruiser Endless Glory will engage your vessel in a simulated combat scenario. I trust your crew understands this is merely educational? Completely understood, Admiral. Captain Morrison has explicit orders to treat this as a learning experience. What Chen didn't mention was that Morrison had other orders as well, delivered in person just hours earlier. The kind of orders that came directly from Earth Command and carried the weight of humanity's future. The Endless Glory moved away from the Zeltharian formation with liquid grace, her silver hull catching the light of soul in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. She was smaller than the flagship but still dwarfed the human vessel, her sleek lines speaking to perfection of design that had been refined over millennia. The Intrepid, by contrast, looked like she'd been built in a junkyard. Her hull was a patchwork of different armor types, welded together in configurations that seemed random to anyone unfamiliar with human engineering philosophy. External equipment pods dotted her surface like metallic tumors, and her overall design suggested a species more concerned with function than form. The rules of engagement are simple, Vostal announced over the open channel. Non-lethal weapons only, first vessel to achieve a mission kill victory wins. I believe your people have a saying about David and Goliath? Perhaps today we will see if small stones can still fell giants. Chen caught the patronizing tone and smiled grimly. Perhaps we will. The two ships took positions at opposite ends of the designated combat zone, a volume of space roughly the size of Earth's moon. Around them, both fleets watched with interest, the Zeltharians with amused anticipation, the humans with grim determination. Simulation begins in 30 seconds, announced the Zeltharian controller. Weapons are live but limited to training yields. All impacts will be recorded and analyzed for effectiveness. Chen opened a private channel to the Intrepid. Morrison, you know what to do. Show them why we build ships the way we do. Copy that, Admiral. It'll be my pleasure. The signal came, and, immediately the endless glory demonstrated why the Zeltharian Empire ruled half the galaxy. The alien cruiser moved like a striking serpent, her engines producing impossible acceleration without any visible exhaust. Energy beams lanced out with surgical precision, striking the Intrepid's bow armor and sending cascades of sparks across her hull. But the human ship didn't stop. The armor held, absorbing the energy that should have penetrated to vital systems. Warning lights flashed on the Intrepid's bridge, but Morrison's crew worked with the calm efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this scenario. Interesting, Vostal murmured over the channel. Your armor is more effective than our projections suggested. We've had to get creative over the years, Chen replied. When you can't outrun your problems, you learn to take a hit. The endless glory adjusted her tactics, launching a swarm of guided projectiles that should have overwhelmed any human point defense system. The Intrepid's response was immediate and violent. Dozens of defensive turrets erupted from concealed positions across her hull, filling space with a web of intersecting fire that destroyed the incoming missiles in brilliant explosions. Most impressive defensive systems, Vostal observed. Though I fear they cannot protect you from this. The alien cruiser's main weapon charged with a sound like reality tearing, energy building to levels that made the previous attacks look like gentle taps. When it fired, the beam should have cut through the Intrepid's armor like a hot knife through butter. Instead, something impossible happened. The beam struck the human ship and simply vanished, absorbed into hull sections that suddenly glowed with collected energy. For a moment, the Intrepid hung in space like a constellation, her entire hull shining with captured power. Then, she returned it all at once. The energy that had been meant to destroy her erupted from hidden emitters across her hull, focused into a coherent beam that struck the endless glory amidships. The alien ship's shields flared and died under the impact. Her own power turned against her in a way that sent shockwaves through both fleets. What? The word escaped Vostal before he could stop it, his composure cracking for the first time since his arrival. Chen smiled. Reactive armor, Admiral. We learned the principle from studying how certain Earth creatures handle threats. When something hits you hard enough, sometimes the best response is to hit back even harder. The demonstration was far from over. The endless glory, her shields down but her weapons still functional, launched into an attack pattern that should have overwhelmed any human crew. She moved in 3 dimensions simultaneously, using gravitational manipulation to alter her trajectory in ways that defied conventional physics. But Morrison had been expecting this. The Intrepid's response was not to match the alien ship's elegant maneuvers but to do something entirely different. Her hull suddenly blossomed with what looked like metallic flowers, each one revealing itself to be a hidden thruster array. In seconds, the human ship went from a single target to a distributed cloud of components, each one moving independently while maintaining connection to the whole. Modular design, Chen explained as the Zeltharians watched in growing amazement. When you can't be faster than your enemy, be more confusing. The Intrepid's components worked together with perfect coordination, creating overlapping fields of fire that made it impossible for the endless glory to target any single vital system. Worse, from the alien ship's perspective, each component seemed to have its own specialized weapon systems designed for specific tactical roles. What had appeared to be a single primitive warship was revealing itself to be an entire fleet in disguise. The Endless Glory's captain, clearly rattled by facing tactics he'd never encountered before, made the mistake of trying to engage multiple Intrepid components simultaneously. His ship's targeting systems, designed for the elegant single-ship duels favored by most galactic civilizations, couldn't adapt to the chaos of human combat philosophy. Morrison chose that moment to spring his final surprise. The scattered components of the Intrepid suddenly accelerated toward each other, magnetic grapples locking them back into their original configuration with violent precision. But now the ship was different, reconfigured into a new arrangement that maximized her offensive capabilities while presenting the smallest possible target profile. The final exchange was over in seconds. The reconfigured Intrepid fired everything she had, not in the elegant sequences favored by other species but in a massive coordinated barrage that overwhelmed the Endless Glory's partially recovered defenses. The alien ship found herself trapped in a sphere of intersecting energy beams, her beautiful hull scarred by impacts that would have been impossible to achieve using conventional tactics. Mission kill achieved, announced the monitoring system. The Endless Glory is assessed as combat ineffective. Silence fell across both fleets as the implications sank in. A human ship that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts had just defeated one of the most advanced vessels in the Zeltharian Navy, using tactics that had been declared obsolete by galactic military doctrine centuries ago. Admiral Vosthal's face had gone completely pale, his marble features now looking more like actual stone. "This is impossible. Our projections showed that your vessel should have been destroyed within minutes." "Your projections were based on conventional thinking," Chen replied. "Humans gave up on conventional a long time ago. We've had to learn to fight smarter, not harder." As the Intrepid reassembled herself and returned to formation, her hull already beginning the self-repair processes that would have her combat ready again within hours, Chen could see the effect of the demonstration rippling through the Zeltharian fleet. Ships that had seemed confident and superior just minutes ago now hung in space like confused giants, their crews undoubtedly running new calculations and coming up with answers they didn't like. "I believe," Chen continued, "that this concludes our demonstration, Admiral. Unless you'd like to try again with a different ship?" The challenge hung in space between them, and Chen could see Vostal calculating odds that no longer made sense. His empire's entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that technological superiority would always triumph over primitive tactics. The idea that a species could survive and thrive by being more adaptable rather than more advanced was foreign to everything he understood about warfare. "No," he said finally. "I believe one demonstration is sufficient. Perhaps we should discuss the terms of our cultural exchange in greater detail." The careful phrasing wasn't lost on anyone. Cultural exchange, not conquest. The balance of power in the Sol system had shifted dramatically in the span of a single engagement, and everyone knew it. As the two fleets began to reposition themselves for the formal negotiations that would follow, Chen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The demonstration had gone exactly as planned, but she knew this was only the beginning. The Zeltharians had just learned that humanity was more than they appeared to be, but they hadn't yet discovered the full scope of what they were dealing with. That revelation would come later, when they learned about the other ships in the human fleet, the ones that made the Intrepid look conventional by comparison. Ships that incorporated lessons learned from every defeated enemy humanity had ever faced, every impossible situation they had ever survived. Ships that had been designed by a species that had turned military engineering into a form of art, where function mattered more than beauty and effectiveness trumped elegance every single time. The aftermath of the demonstration hung in space like an unspoken question. Admiral Vostal had requested a recess to consult with his fleet commanders, and Chen could see the alien ships clustered in tight formation, their perfect lines somehow less intimidating than they had been an hour ago. She knew they were recalculating everything they thought they knew about human military capabilities, and she intended to give them plenty more to think about. "Admiral," Commander Martinez approached her command chair, his voice carefully neutral. "We're receiving requests from our own fleet. Every captain wants to know if they're going to get a chance to show what their ships can do." Chen smiled grimly. The human fleet was full of vessels like the Intrepid, each one designed around a different tactical philosophy and built to solve specific problems that conventional military thinking couldn't handle. Earth Command had spent decades preparing for this moment, knowing that eventually humanity would encounter a species that thought technology alone could determine the outcome of any conflict. "Tell them to be patient. I have a feeling Admiral Vostal isn't done with his demonstrations yet." As if summoned by her words, the communication channel reopened, revealing the Zeltharian commander's carefully composed features. But Chen could see the uncertainty beneath his diplomatic mask, the way his eyes moved as if he were still processing information that didn't fit his understanding of galactic warfare. "Admiral Chen," Vostal began, "that was indeed an impressive display. However, I believe it may have been somewhat misleading. The Endless Glory was operating under simulation parameters that limited her response options. Perhaps a more comprehensive demonstration would be appropriate?" Chen felt a surge of anticipation. This was exactly what Earth Command had hoped for, the chance to show multiple aspects of human military design philosophy. "What did you have in mind, Admiral?" "A fleet action. 3 of our vessels against 3 of yours. This would provide a more accurate assessment of our respective capabilities." "That seems reasonable," Chen replied. "Though I should warn you, our ships tend to be somewhat unorthodox in their design philosophy. Your crews might find the experience educational." The predatory gleam returned to Vostal's eyes. "I'm sure they will adapt. Shall we say 1 hour to prepare?" As the channel closed, Chen was already activating her fleet communications. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Captains Morrison, Singh, and Nakamura, you're up. Standard Demon Demonstration Protocol, full authorization. Show them why we build different. An hour later, 6 ships faced each other across the void. On the Zeltharian side, 3 cruisers hung in perfect formation, their silver hulls gleaming like jewels. Each ship was a work of art, flowing lines and integrated systems that spoke to millennia of refined engineering. They moved with fluid grace, energy signatures so clean they barely registered on human sensors. The human ships were a study in contrasts. The Intrepid held the center position, her modular design already partially reconfigured for fleet combat. To her left floated the UES Prometheus, Captain Singh's command, which looked like someone had taken a conventional warship and covered it with mechanical parasites. To the right, the UES Shogun under Captain Nakamura appeared to be built entirely from angles that hurt to look at, her hull a maze of geometric patterns that seemed to shift when observed directly. Interesting formation, Vostal observed. Your ships seem quite different from each other. Most fleets prefer standardized designs for tactical coordination. Standardization has its place, Chen replied. But we've found that diversity tends to be more effective against unknown threats. Each of our vessels represents a different approach to the same problem. And what problem is that? How to win a fight you're not supposed to be able to win. The engagement began with the Zeltharians demonstrating exactly why their empire had conquered so much of the galaxy. The 3 alien cruisers moved like dancers, their formation shifting and flowing to create overlapping fields of fire while maintaining perfect coordination. Energy beams lanced out with surgical precision, targeting what their computers identified as the most vulnerable systems on each human vessel. The attacks struck home with devastating accuracy, but the results were not what the Zeltharians expected. The Prometheus absorbed the impacts without flinching, her hull seeming to drink in the energy like a sponge. Then, to the amazement of both fleets, the mechanical growths across her surface began to move, revealing themselves to be not parasites but symbiotic systems. Each one had been designed to absorb, process, and redirect different types of energy, turning enemy attacks into raw material for the ship's own weapons systems. Biomimetic adaptive armor, Captain Singh announced over the fleet channel. We studied how certain earth fungi process hostile environments and adapted the principles for ship defense. The more you shoot at us, the stronger we get. Meanwhile, the Shogun was demonstrating why her bizarre angular design made tactical sense. The geometric patterns on her hull weren't decorative, they were stealth systems that bent sensor readings and made it impossible for enemy targeting computers to get a reliable lock. The alien ship's weapons fire seemed to bend around her, striking empty space where she should have been. Computational camouflage, Captain Nakamura explained. We can't match your sensor technology, so we developed ways to confuse it instead. Your computers see what we want them to see. But it was the Intrepid that provided the most shocking surprise. As the Zeltharian ships concentrated their fire on what they perceived as the most conventional target, Morrison's vessel simply came apart again. But, this time, instead of scattering into defensive positions, the components accelerated away from the battle zone at impossible speeds. For a moment, it looked like the human ship was retreating. Then, the reality of the situation became clear as sensor contacts began appearing throughout the Zeltharian formation. The Intrepid hadn't retreated, she had deployed. Distributed warfare doctrine, Morrison announced as his ship's components opened fire from positions throughout the enemy formation. When you can't match their technology, change the rules of engagement. Each Intrepid component was now operating independently, using micro-jump drives that allowed them to appear anywhere within the combat zone without warning. The Zeltharian ships found themselves taking fire from all directions, their elegant formation turned into a liability as they had to worry about hitting their own vessels. Admiral Vostal's voice cut across the battle communications, tight with something that might have been panic. This is impossible. Ships cannot simply appear anywhere they choose. Our sensors should detect any movement. Your sensors are designed to track ships that follow conventional physics, Chen replied. We found that unconventional physics can be much more useful in combat situations. The Prometheus had begun her own demonstration, the symbiotic systems across her hull now fully active and converting the Zeltharian weapons fire into raw energy for her own use. When she fired back, her weapons were powered not just by her own reactors but by everything the aliens had thrown at her. The resulting energy discharge was so powerful it overwhelmed the shields of the nearest Zeltharian cruiser in a single shot. The Shogun, meanwhile, had become effectively invisible to the enemy targeting systems. Her weapons fire seemed to emerge from empty space, striking with precision while offering no target for return fire. The geometric patterns on her hull shifted continuously, creating new sensor shadows and false targets that made coordinated attack impossible. Admiral, one of the Zeltharian captains, spoke over an open channel, his voice strained. "Request permission to withdraw and regroup. We cannot establish effective targeting solutions." But Vostal's reply never came, because at that moment the human ships revealed their final surprise. The battle had been a demonstration not just of individual ship capabilities but of how those capabilities could work together in ways that no standardized fleet could match. The intrepid components suddenly converged on the Zeltharian flagship, not to ram but to create a sensor cage that isolated it from the rest of its fleet. The Prometheus moved to support them, her energy absorption systems now projecting defensive shields that protected the human ships while continuing to drain power from any weapons fired at them. And the Shogun simply vanished from all sensors, her computational camouflage so perfect that she might as well have ceased to exist. When she reappeared, it was directly behind the flagship, her weapons already charged and targeted at the alien ship's engine systems. "Exercise complete," announced the monitoring system. "All Zeltharian vessels are assessed as mission killed or combat ineffective." The silence that followed was deafening. 3 of the most advanced ships in the galaxy had been defeated by vessels that looked like they'd been built from spare parts and impossible theories. More than that, they had been defeated by tactics that violated every principle of space warfare that the Zeltharian Empire considered fundamental. Admiral Vostal's image appeared on the main screen, and, for the first time since his arrival, he looked genuinely shaken. The marble perfection of his features had cracked, revealing something almost human underneath uncertainty, confusion, and the beginning of what might have been fear. "How?" he asked, the single word carrying the weight of a civilization's shattered assumptions. Chen considered her answer carefully. This moment would determine whether the rest of this encounter proceeded peacefully or devolved into the kind of war that would consume star systems. The Zeltharians needed to understand that humanity was not a threat to be conquered but a species to be respected. 50,000 years ago, your empire began its expansion, she said finally. You conquered species after species, always by being more advanced, more powerful, more perfect than anything you encountered. But we're not more perfect than you, Admiral. We're something else entirely. And what is that? Chen gestured toward the human ships as they began to reassemble and reposition themselves with casual efficiency. Each vessel looked battered and improvised, held together by determination and engineering principles that seemed to defy logic. But they worked, and, more importantly, they won. We're the species that learned how to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. Every weakness into a strength. Every limitation into an opportunity. She paused, letting the implications sink in. You build your ships to be perfect. We build ours to be impossible to defeat. The demonstration was over, but Chen knew the real test was just beginning. The Zeltharians now understood that humanity was not what they had expected, but they hadn't yet grasped the full implications of what that meant. They were still thinking in terms of military capability and territorial expansion. They had no idea they were about to discover something that would challenge everything they believed about power, civilization, and the nature of strength itself. The formal negotiations began 12 hours after the fleet demonstration, held aboard the neutral ground of Mars Station Olympus. Admiral Chen arrived to find the Zeltharian delegation already assembled in the station's main conference room, their elegant forms creating stark contrast against the utilitarian human architecture. Admiral Vostal looked like he had aged decades overnight, his marble features marked by something that might have been the beginning of genuine respect mixed with profound uncertainty. The other Zeltharian officers flanked him, their previous arrogance replaced by the careful attention of beings who had suddenly realized they were operating without their usual advantages. Admiral Chen, Vostal began as she took her seat across the polished metal table. I believe we need to reconsider the nature of our initial proposal. Chen nodded, having expected this. I'm listening. Your display yesterday was most instructive. It's clear that human military doctrine represents a significant departure from galactic norms. However, I confess myself curious about the broader implications. These ships of yours, these tactics, they suggest a very different approach to civilization itself. In what way? Vostal leaned forward slightly, his alien features intent. Every species the Empire has encountered follows predictable patterns of development. They achieve faster than light travel, then energy shields, then gravity manipulation, then eventually artificial intelligence that surpasses biological limitations. Each step builds logically on the last. And, we don't fit that pattern? You appear to have deliberately avoided several of those steps entirely, while achieving capabilities that our computers insist should be impossible given your technological base. This suggests either revolutionary breakthroughs that you've somehow kept completely secret, or, Chun prompted. Or your species has developed along completely different lines from anything in our historical database. Which raises the question of what else you might be capable of that we haven't yet seen. Chen smiled. This was the opening she had been waiting for. Would you like to find out? The tour began with Mars Station Olympus itself, a facility that had been selected specifically for its ability to showcase human engineering philosophy. Where most space stations were elegant spires of crystal and energy fields, Olympus looked like it had been built by practical engineers who cared more about function than form. This station was constructed over a period of 30 years, Chen explained as they walked through corridors that seemed to branch and connect in ways that defy conventional spatial logic. But, not all at once. We started with a basic framework and added sections as needed, based on what we learned from each previous expansion. Adaptive construction, observed one of the younger Zeltharian officers. Most species designed their entire station before beginning construction. Most species don't have to worry about running out of resources halfway through, Chen replied. We've learned to build things that can grow and change as circumstances require. They paused at a viewing port that looked out onto the Martian surface, where the massive shipyards sprawled across the red landscape like mechanical cities. Even from orbit, the scale of human industry was impressive, not elegant or refined like Zeltharian manufacturing, but undeniably powerful in its scope and ambition. How many vessels can your facilities produce? Vosthal asked. As many as we need, Chen answered, deliberately vague. Our production philosophy is based on scalability rather than perfection. We can build 1,000 adequate ships faster than most species can build one perfect one. What she didn't mention was that the shipyards they could see represented only a fraction of human industrial capacity. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt and outer system were dozens of automated facilities, each one capable of producing complete vessels from raw materials with minimal human oversight. It was a manufacturing base designed by a species that had learned early that wars were won by logistics as much as technology. The tour continued into the station's technical sections, where the Zeltharians got their first close look at human engineering practices. In the main reactor facility, they watched human technicians working alongside systems that should have required computer control but were instead operated by beings who seemed to understand their machinery on an almost instinctive level. Your crew appears to have an unusual relationship with their equipment, Vosthal observed. We've found that the best engineers are the ones who think like their machines, Chen replied. When you're working with systems that have to function under impossible conditions, you need operators who can adapt as quickly as the situation changes. In the weapons development labs, the Zeltharians witnessed something that challenged their understanding of how military technology should evolve. Instead of the sleek, standardized weapons systems favored by most galactic civilizations, the humans were working with devices that looked like they had been cobbled together from spare parts and theoretical physics. This weapon system, one of the Zeltharian technical specialists said, studying a device that appeared to be part particle accelerator and part controlled singularity generator, it should not function. The power requirements alone would exceed your entire station's output. The human engineer looked up from his work with a grin. Yeah, that's what we thought too. But, then, we figured out how to make it generate more power than it consumes by tapping quantum vacuum fluctuations. Turns out you can get energy from nothing if you're creative enough about how you define nothing. Admiral Vosthal's expression suggested he was beginning to understand that the previous day's demonstration had only shown him the tip of a very large iceberg. How many of these creative solutions do you possess? As many as we need to solve whatever problems we encounter, Chen replied. We've found that when conventional answers don't work, unconventional ones usually do. The final stop on the tour was the station's strategic command center, where massive holographic displays showed the disposition of every human vessel in the Sol system. The Zeltharians studied the tactical readouts with growing amazement, realizing that what they had assumed was humanity's entire fleet represented only the ships currently visible to their sensors. These readings, another Zeltharian officer said slowly, they indicate stealth capabilities far beyond what your ships demonstrated yesterday. Yesterday was about showing you what we could do openly, Chen explained. But, we've also learned the value of keeping some capabilities in reserve. Would you like to see? At her signal, the tactical display suddenly filled with new contacts. Ships that had been invisible to even the most advanced Zeltharian sensors revealed themselves throughout the system, their positions indicating that the human fleet was roughly 10 times larger than the aliens had estimated. But, more shocking than the numbers was the nature of the vessels themselves. Ships that bent space around them like living things. Vessels that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Craft that seemed to be made of pure energy held together by will and engineering principles that violated several fundamental laws of physics. "This is impossible," Vostal whispered. "Some of these configurations should collapse into black holes. Others should simply cease to exist the moment they're activated." "They probably should," Chen agreed. "But, we've found that if you understand the underlying principles well enough, you can convince reality to be more flexible about what's possible." One of the displayed ships caught Vostal's particular attention, a vessel that appeared to be constructed entirely from crystalline formations that pulsed with their own inner light. "That ship, what is its function?" Chen followed his gaze and smiled. "The UES Phoenix. She's our deep space exploration vessel. Her mission is to map regions of space where conventional physics breaks down. Her crew has been to places where time runs backward and gravity flows uphill." "And they returned?" "Eventually. Though they're not entirely sure they came back to the same universe they left. The important thing is that they brought back information about how to navigate impossible regions of space. Knowledge we've used to develop some of our more interesting tactical capabilities." The implications were staggering. Humanity had not just developed unconventional military technology, they had apparently rewritten their understanding of reality itself, turning the impossible into the merely improbable through sheer determination and engineering audacity. Admiral Vostal sank into one of the conference room chairs, his composure finally cracking completely. "Your species, how long have you possessed these capabilities?" "We've been working on them for about 200 years, Chen replied casually. "Ever since we realized that conventional development would never let us compete with established galactic civilizations. So we decided to develop in directions that no one else had tried." "And this is all of it? No more surprises?" Chen's smile was entirely innocent. "Oh no, Admiral. This is just what we're comfortable showing to visitors. Our really interesting projects are still classified." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the station's life support systems. The Zeltharians sat in their chairs like statues, their perfect features frozen as they tried to process the magnitude of what they had discovered. They had come to the Sol system expecting to find a primitive species ripe for conquest. Instead, they had encountered beings who had apparently decided that the laws of physics were more like suggestions, and who had built an entire civilization around the principle that any problem could be solved if you were willing to think creatively enough about the solution. "Admiral Chen," Vostal said finally, his voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there when he arrived. "I believe it's time we discussed the terms of a formal alliance between our species." The word alliance hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that would reshape the political balance of the galaxy. Chen could see the exact moment when the Zeltharian commander realized that his empire's age of easy expansion had just come to an end. "I'm listening," Chen replied, and prepared to negotiate the future of two civilizations from a position she had never expected to occupy, one of absolute strength. 6 months later, Admiral Chen stood once again on the observation deck of Mars Station Olympus, but the view had changed dramatically. Where once the Martian shipyards had been exclusively human operations, now they buzzed with joint construction projects that would have been impossible to imagine when the Zeltharian fleet first arrived. The formal alliance had been signed 3 months ago, but the real work had begun immediately afterward. Both species had discovered that they had far more to learn from each other than either had initially suspected. "Admiral Chen," Admiral Vostal's voice carried a warmth that would have been impossible during their first meeting. The Zeltharian commander had requested this final meeting before his fleet departed for home, carrying with them the beginnings of a technological revolution that would reshape both civilizations. "Admiral Vostal," Chen replied, turning from the viewport. "Ready for the journey home?" "As ready as one can be when returning to report that everything your empire believed about technological development was incomplete." He moved to stand beside her at the window, looking out at the hybrid vessels taking shape in the construction bays below. "I confess I'm still not entirely certain how to explain what we've learned here." Chen smiled. "That human engineering is completely insane but surprisingly effective?" "Something like that." Vostal paused, his alien features thoughtful. We've spent 50,000 years perfecting our understanding of how the universe works. You've spent 200 years learning how to make it work differently. The combination is proving quite remarkable. Below them, the first joint-constructed vessel was nearing completion. The UESES Harmony was a fusion of technologies that should have been impossible: Zeltharian gravity manipulation systems integrated with human adaptive engineering, energy shields that could learn and evolve combined with armor that could redistribute damage across quantum dimensions. It was a ship that represented the best of both civilizations, and, according to the engineering teams, it was only the beginning. Your people's willingness to share technology has been unexpected, Vostal continued. Most species guard their military secrets jealously. Most species develop technology for conquest, Chen replied. We developed ours for survival. There's a difference. The distinction had become clear over the past months of collaboration. Zeltharian technology was designed for dominance, powerful, elegant, and standardized systems that could overwhelm any conventional opposition. Human technology was designed for adaptation, flexible, redundant, and often deliberately inefficient systems that could function under conditions that would destroy more refined equipment. Together, they were creating something entirely new. The concept of controlled chaos engineering is still difficult for our scientists to accept, Vostal admitted. The idea that you would deliberately introduce random variables into your designs. Chaos makes things stronger, Chen said. When you can't predict what's going to go wrong, you build things that can handle anything. Your people are learning that perfection isn't always the best solution. It had been fascinating to watch. Zeltharian engineers, trained for millennia to optimize every system to theoretical maximum efficiency, had initially been horrified by human design principles. Why build redundant systems when perfect ones would never fail? Why plan for impossible scenarios when proper design made them irrelevant? Then, they had seen human ships continue fighting after taking damage that should have been instantly fatal, watched human crews repair impossible problems with spare parts and determination, and witnessed human tactics that turned disasters into victories through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Now, Zeltharian ships were being retrofitted with human-style adaptive systems, while human vessels were gaining access to power sources and computational systems beyond their wildest dreams. The result was a new generation of hybrid vessels that neither species could have created alone. There's something else, Vostal said, his tone becoming more serious. Something I learned during our time here that I believe you should know. Chen looked at him questioningly. The Zeltharian Empire has encountered 19 other species in the past 10,000 years. Each time, we arrived with displays of superior technology and offered them the choice between submission and destruction. Each time, they chose submission. And each time, we genuinely believed we were offering them the better path. Our empire works because every species contributes their unique capabilities to the collective whole. We thought we were saving them from the chaos of independent development. Chen waited, sensing there was more. What we learned here is that there's a third option. One we never considered because we never encountered a species that could make it work. He turned to face her directly. Partnership between equals. Not submission to superior technology, but collaboration between different approaches to the same problems. The implications of that realization had been rippling through the Zeltharian Empire ever since the first reports arrived. Several of their subject species had begun asking questions about their own relationship with the Empire, wondering if there might be alternatives to the submission they had accepted centuries ago. Change is hard, Chen observed. Especially when you've been successful for as long as your empire has. Indeed. But necessary, I think. We've learned that our way of thinking about technological development may have been limiting us in ways we didn't recognize. Your species has shown us possibilities we never imagined. Through the viewport, they could see the launch of another joint vessel, this one bound for the edge of the galaxy on an exploration mission that combined human curiosity with Zeltharian navigation technology. It was the first of many such missions planned, expeditions to regions of space that neither species could have explored safely alone. There's one thing I'm curious about, Vostal said. When our fleets first met, you were clearly prepared for exactly the kind of demonstration we had planned. Your people knew we would underestimate you, and you used that to your advantage. Chen nodded. We've had a lot of practice being underestimated. But how did you know we would react the way we did? How could you be certain that we wouldn't simply resort to force when our technological superiority failed to have the expected effect? It was a good question, and one that went to the heart of human survival strategy. Because we studied everything we could learn about the Zeltharian Empire before you arrived. Your expansion pattern, your diplomatic methods, your military doctrine. Everything pointed to a species that preferred psychological dominance to physical destruction. And if you had been wrong? Chen's smile was grim. Then, we had other plans. Ones that would have made the demonstrations you saw look like gentle suggestions. The truth was that the human fleet in the Sol system represented only a tiny fraction of their actual military capability. Hidden throughout human space were weapons systems and defensive installations that made their conventional ships look primitive by comparison. Earth Command had been preparing for this encounter for decades, developing contingencies for every possible outcome. But the best outcome had always been the one they achieved, turning a potential enemy into an ally through the simple expedient of showing them that humans were worth more as partners than as subjects. I have a confession, Vothal said as they prepared to part. When I first arrived here, I expected this to be a simple expansion mission. Another primitive species to be brought into the Empire's fold. I never imagined I would be returning home with recommendations that could reshape our entire civilization. Good changes usually start with someone being willing to admit they don't know everything, Chen replied. As the Zeltharian fleet prepared to depart, their ships no longer looked quite as perfect as they had on arrival. Human design modifications were visible across their hulls, adaptive systems and backup equipment that would have horrified Zeltharian engineers 6 months ago. But they were still elegant, still beautiful, and now they were also something they had never been before: resilient. The human ships that would accompany them on their journey home showed similar changes. Sleek Zeltharian power systems and gravity manipulation technology had been integrated into their designs, giving them capabilities that would have been impossible using purely human technology. They were still recognizably human vessels, angular, practical, and built to survive anything the universe could throw at them, but they were also something new. They were the beginning of a new kind of starship, designed by two species that had learned to combine their strengths instead of competing with their weaknesses. Farewell, Admiral Chen, Vothal said as he prepared to return to his flagship. I suspect this will not be the last time our paths cross. I'm counting on it, Chen replied. The galaxy is a big place, and there's a lot we still don't know about it. Having partners makes exploration a lot safer. As the Zeltharian fleet departed, their ships moving with the same fluid grace that had marked their arrival but now accompanied by human vessels that seemed to dance alongside them rather than struggle to keep up, Chen felt a deep satisfaction. They had started this encounter as potential enemies and ended it as allies. But, more than that, they had proven something that both species needed to learn: that there was more than one path to greatness among the stars. The Zeltharian Empire had achieved dominance through perfection and technological superiority. Humanity had achieved resilience through adaptation and stubborn determination. Together, they were going to discover what was possible when you combined the best of both approaches. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place, and Chen had a feeling that the universe was going to need all the creativity it could get for whatever challenges lay ahead. After all, if the past 6 months had taught them anything, it was that the impossible was just another problem waiting for the right solution. And, between human ingenuity and Zeltharian precision, there weren't many problems they couldn't solve. The age of easy conquest was over. The age of cooperation was just beginning, and the stars themselves would never be the same.